Every person on the planet wants to be healthy. And yet, we keep getting survey results that show that 99% of adults drink sweet drinks, 97% of adults eat candy, and 90% of adults are still eating red meat. We've recently had a survey from Harvard showing that there is an association between red meat and diabetes. What are we supposed to take from this information? Wellness Warrior, I want to share with you why I'm not concerned about this connection that they've found between red meat and diabetes. The first point I want to make is that we've been taught to listen to our parents and our teachers. We've been taught to follow our boss's directions to the letter, or we could get fired. And we've been taught to do everything our doctor says for fear of our actual lives. And most of us believe that our doctor's advice is based on sound medical science that's coming from the medical research that happens repeatedly throughout the years. They're always trying to make sure that we have the best information for our health. Because of this, we follow what they say blindly, right? We don't check on anything that they're telling us. But what happens when the doctor's advice actually opposes what your life experience is telling you is reality? When I was in my 20s, my left thigh started to be numb. And at one point I was like, I could smash it, felt nothing. So I went to see my doctor. And the doctor told me, after doing an exam of like 3 minutes, asking questions for a minute and a half of that, there's nothing that can be done. That happens sometimes. You're just going to have to learn to live with it. And I was sent on my merry way. Now you might think I was just unlucky and ended up in front of a bad doctor, right? So no, there's more. When I was in my 30s, I was in front of another doctor, so a different doctor, because I was having sleep issues. And the doctor did acknowledge that, yes, I had some issues in my passageways, and that was causing my sleep issues. But then turned around and says, it's not really that bad. And so, you don't have to do anything right now. You could wait for it to get worse before you do anything about it. That was actually the suggestion, to just leave it and wait for it to get worse. And his reasoning was because, well, the treatments are kind of expensive. But wait, there's more. When I was in my 40s, my hip on the right side was hurting me. And I went to see my doctor. At that point, by the time I went to see my doctor, I could barely step up on a sidewalk without being in excruciating pain. I wasn't sleeping well. I was not able to sit for any length of time. I was in horrible pain. And the doctor told me that my hip was bad, but it wasn't bad enough for surgery yet, so that I would need to wait. And he prescribed me some pain medication. In the case of my thigh, I listened like a good little patient, and I tried to go on with my life. And honestly, for the first few weeks, it was pretty devastating, and I was just like very upset. But eventually, you kind of get used to things and you move on. And I don't even know when it happened that all of a sudden I realized the sensation in my thigh came back. Now, of course, for the sleep issue, since there was an actual procedure that I could get done, and it was just a matter of cost, I paid for it. I didn't wait for it to get worse. But the big question becomes, why would they ask me to wait for things to get worse? Why wouldn't they just encourage me to do whatever procedures needed to be done immediately? And it's because while they're asking me to wait, they were giving me medications, right? And offering me solutions that were not real solutions. They were Band-Aids while we're waiting for something else to happen. Something worse to happen, by the way. And that's what I want to talk about right now, is that the scary side of research. I talk about this when it comes to food all the time. The fact that the research that we believe they're doing for our health, some of it is actually to figure out ways to get us to be more in a system. Sometimes the system is, when it's food, is eat more of this so that your health gets ruined, so that we can flip you over into, oh, take this medication so your health gets even more ruined, so we can flip you into, oh, well, now you need this surgery. And, those two might flip back and forth because sometimes the surgery comes first and then you need the medication. But regardless, you're in a system that forever now you're paying money to feel minimally okay. And you might wonder, like, how can I say that with such confidence? Well, it's because, Wellness Warrior, have you ever thought what would happen if a food company put out a product and they said something like, this is the best and most highly addictive breakfast cereal? Or how about dependency producing afternoon snack? Or how about, once you try this supper, your compulsion to eat it will never stop? Would those be things that they could say that would get you to buy their product? But funny enough, big soda, I'm not going to say which company, but there was a big soda company that actually was calling its customers that, bought a lot of their product heavy users. That's terminology that we use for people who have issues with consumption. We've been programmed to do what our doctors tell us to do based on the fact that the research is telling them to tell us that. But I want us to be afraid because the research also produces these products that cause us to chase, and they're causing us to chase knowingly. They're causing us to be addicted to these foods knowingly. So if I can't trust you when you're telling me that the food is healthy, can I trust you when you're telling me the procedure? Can I trust you when you're saying that research says I shouldn't eat one thing versus the other? Now, research. Let's talk about that for a second.
Meet the evidence pyramid, more formally known as the research hierarchy. Down the bottom, we've got the lowest level of evidence. The middle layer, in light blue, refers to a weak type of research known as observational or epidemiological studies. Now, the ranking of observational studies down from the top of the hierarchy reflects their limitations. As the name suggests, they involve the observation of populations, and relationships between observations are then interpreted. For example, the rate of cancer might be compared to the number of bananas eaten. It's important to understand, though, that just because two observations associate together provides no evidence that one caused the other. Observational research cannot prove anything. In a legal sense, observational research provides circumstantial evidence. Any researcher who uses observational evidence to prove causation is not only scientifically incompetent, they probably don't like cats. And here's the rub. Whenever you see headlines demonising red meat, they refer to either a link or an association. And when you see these words, you know that the research was observational, and therefore the conclusions drawn are almost certainly meaningless. So instead of observational research, we should seek out randomised controlled trials, shown here in yellow. And unlike observational studies, these can control for the effects of confounders. In a randomised controlled trial, subjects, along with all of their confounding variables, are randomly allocated to one of two groups. And with enough numbers, this random allocation means that the confounding variables are evenly distributed and therefore don't affect the study results. This research design is considered gold standard, and unlike observational studies, randomised controlled trials can show causation. As an aside, you might be wondering, what is at the very top of the pyramid? Well, systematic reviews are when researchers collate all the available evidence using unbiased search criteria. The problem is that even when well performed, a systematic review can only be as good as the quality of included studies. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. So in addition to study design, research can often be compromised by using poor outcome measures. This is particularly common in studies that seem to promote vegan diets.
One of the big questions you have to ask yourselves is, can we trust the research, right? They're doing all of this research, but is it really towards our benefit? And what about the research that they're actually doing? This study was a systematic review of 3 huge studies. So what does that tell us about the quality of the data that they collected? Here is the first problem that I have with the actual study, right? Because in the study that's being hailed as proof that there's this big relationship between diabetes and red meat, the individuals, so the participants, were divided into quintiles. from the least consumption of red meat to the most consumption of red meat. The problem that I saw, though, was that those people who ate the most red meat were also the people who smoked more, drank more, and didn't exercise as much. What we're actually looking at is a healthy person bias, right? The healthy user is the person who's much more likely to engage the healthy things that their doctor tells them to do, right? Those people who already are limiting their red meat consumption are much more likely to exercise, are much more likely to be careful about how much they drink. And maybe they're not smokers, or if they do smoke, they're not smoking as heavily as the people who don't follow the other basic guidelines from our doctors. The other issue that I have with the study has more to do with society than it actually does with the study itself. Because we've been taught to respect prestigious institutions. We've been taught to respect authorities, which Harvard is an authority because it's a prestigious institution. We've been taught to defer to those who have knowledge and, of course, follow the rules and follow along, right? Like I said earlier, we automatically give reports and research and information coming out of Harvard more credibility, more attention, more weight than it deserves because it's coming out of Harvard. Harvard is linked to words like intelligence, history, excellence, and trust. When we link these kind of things together, we just automatically assume it's going to be there, right? We don't do our own research. We don't verify that the research that's being presented to us was quality research to begin with, that the research methods made sense, that they investigated everything. This was a food survey.
Another issue is that much of the observational research on nutrition is performed using self-reported food frequency questionnaires, as if asking someone how many eggs they consumed in the previous 12 months could be in any way reliable. Bear in mind that most people struggle to remember what they've had for breakfast. And just in case the unreliability of food frequency questionnaires doesn't confound findings enough, researchers often conflate things like pizzas, hot dogs and hamburgers with red meat. And you don't need an overpriced research degree to know that this kind of conflation is not scientifically valid. People eating hamburgers are probably also having a side of Coke and fries. This is called confounding, and it's impossible to control adequately.
And yet they talk about how much red meat, but at nowhere do they talk about how much soda these people drank per week. I find that fishy, since we know that drinking soda is associated with diabetes. Why wasn't that reported? Anyway, when we blindly give trust because we have past knowledge that something's supposed to be good, that they're supposed to be credible, when we blindly give them the benefit of the doubt because they were credible in the past, there's a confirmation bias happening there. And we need to be careful of that, because in this particular case, when we look at the research, the information that went in wasn't great. The data and the way it was manipulated didn't make sense. And yet they're coming back to us saying that it's the red meat, not the junk food, not the sweet drinks, not the fruits, not the rice and potato. It's the meat that was causing diabetes. Wellness warrior, you need to go in and do your background research and read, where is this information coming from? If you put garbage in to an analysis, you will get garbage out of the analysis. When we accept a piece of research data coming out of a prestigious university without question, well, we shouldn't do that. I have questions. Who paid for this review that was being done, right? And where does the money start from whoever it was, right? Because I know that we've seen often that food companies, pharma companies will create lobbies, will create institutions to front for them so that they can fund research. So we not only have to know who paid for the research, but who was putting money into them. What ulterior motives might they have for wanting us to not eat meat? Can we even still trust research coming out of Harvard? I have a video on the screen right here talking about how much we are worth to companies, right? They make a lot of money off of us, Wellness Warrior. You should check it out.